So yesterday, we had talked about the overall preservation of the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, and that it could be a problem going forward into the future, of course, because the SSD on the PlayStation 5, which was brought up quite a bit, was soldered to the board, so it was non-removable. If that dies, then does that mean that the system itself is unrepairable? Any of that. So we talked about that, but after that video went out, I had a few emails come through, and I want to give a shout out to Daniel, who pointed out that the Series X actually has a slight advantage in that department when it comes to the SSD, because from what we can tell right now in a very quick kind of flyby of the SSD during a video that Microsoft put out, it looks like it is not actually soldered to the board. And this is something that I wanted to go over with here because I talked about it being soldered to the board yesterday. A quick correction on that, but also kind of talk about what that could mean for the Series X here as we go into next generation. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if you're new to the Spawn Wave Plus channel, go ahead and subscribe down below as we work towards next generation. We'll have more and more news come out. And I think November is going to be pretty good overall with these systems coming out, games, and all kinds of news to go over here on the Spawn Wave Plus channel. So let's go over to this image here where we can see kind of the board right here of the Series X, and this is the side where we have that NVMe SSD that is underneath of this kind of metal shell here, and that's something that would be covering it up and probably act as a way to help dissipate any heat coming off of that SSD. But because of that shell on top, we can't see the SSD, obviously. Now, when I do get the system and I take it apart, this is something we're going to look at immediately because I want to see what's going on here underneath of that shell, the brand of the SSD that's under there, of course, the form factor. There's a lot of questions when it comes to this. In fact, that metal tray part on top is very common with different devices. A lot of times that'll either protect or work to dissipate heat, and you can generally pop them off because they're kind of punched, like kind of hole punched around the side to just add some extra pressure, and you can pretty easily peel them off and then drop them back on after bending those legs back in. So we are certainly going to be taking a look at that. But underneath of here is the question as to what the SSD is. But in this video here, which was for the Velocity architecture, where they did a whole video and trailer talking about the Velocity architecture they have, which is set up to basically increase the speed of the SSD through compression and all of this. I believe they're pushing it to 4.8 gigabytes per second up from 2.4. And we can see right here, that does indeed look like a slotted SSD. In fact, once I saw this picture that was sent over, I said that looks like an M.2 2230 form factor SSD. And those are common in, think of like smaller tablets. In fact, it looks very, very similar. Just this picture here, obviously, it's like a render, and they've basically blurred the whole thing out through like this blue light that's supposed to be highlighting it. So we have no markings or anything on top of it, but it looks very, very similar to what is in like the Surface Pro X or any of that. In fact, if we take a look at that picture here, we can see, yeah, it looks like the same kind of form factor. It's also a 2230. I believe they are using Toshiba, and there are several different sizes for the SSD here for the NVMe drive, up to 1 terabyte. They have the 128. I believe they have a 256, a 512, and a 1 terabyte. And that could be a way that Microsoft maybe explores a few different things in the future for the Series X, maybe even a revision in the future. But let's say they're at a 1 terabyte right now with this custom NVMe drive, and they're working with a brand like Toshiba, or I mean, they're working with Seagate right now for their external storage. I don't know if they're doing something similar inside where they're also working with Seagate, but most likely because they have worked with Toshiba in the past already, there's a chance that could be the case here. But who knows? When we open it, I'm sure we'll see the branding. That could mean, though, that maybe in the future, the Xbox Series S that's a 512 right now, maybe that gets moved to a terabyte eventually, and maybe this goes up to 2 terabytes. The big thing here is Microsoft opted to go for a slower SSD, but a more powerful system overall, whereas Sony went the opposite direction. They focused on things outside of just how powerful the system was from just a raw standpoint in terms of teraflops and of course CUs, all of these things. Sony decided to clock the chip higher and then focus on areas like the controller, of course, 3D audio, and a much faster SSD. It's twice as fast as what's in the Xbox Series X. I'm still curious how that will play out with third-party games. Does that just mean that the load times will be better on the PS5 and we have to look towards things like first-party games to come up with new ideas and things they can do with the faster SSD? Think of like what's in Ratchet & Clank, where they're shifting between dimensions. Things like that can affect gameplay would, of course, help to sell the idea of a faster SSD in the PS5 over the Series X. And then, of course, the big advantage for the Xbox Series X and this SSD would be the preservation aspect that we just talked about yesterday, which was, if the SSD, whether it's the chip or whatnot on there, fails, on the PS5 it's soldered to the board, but on the Xbox Series X it would be slotted. So maybe we can open it up and over time we figure out how it's partitioned, much like what's in the One X right now, where the hard drive in there took a little bit of time to figure it out, but eventually people managed to figure out the partition that they had set up, the scheme, and kind of copy that over so that there was a full script you could run on an SSD and replace the internal hard drive. Maybe that's something we figure out there, and if it does fail, we can replace it ourselves. Maybe we can replace it with a higher quality part, a faster part. There's a lot of questions right now that we don't know, like just at this point. We have to see if it is a standard M.2 that we can replace, and if it is, then we can do all kinds of stuff with this. And it also means that the board itself would not be just junk if the SSD fails. Now, I do want to stress, like I talked about yesterday, the odds of the SSD being the thing that fails out of all the other things we're doing in this console is fairly low, but it's still something to think about. It's still a part that can fail. So it is nice to know that in the Xbox Series X, at least from what we're seeing here, and I have to imagine the Series S as well, it is something that is replaceable, which is good, and could even be with off-the-shelf parts. We'll have to see. But this, of course, works into Microsoft plans going forward in the factory, where they maybe want to increase the size as these chips become cheaper. They can do so a bit easier just by slotting a different one in. Maybe they work to try to lower prices, and they can, of course, continue to shop around with other companies that produce these SSD NVMEs, and they can try to get the lowest bidder at that point and then say, hey, we're going to drop this in, and now all of a sudden we can start playing around with pricing, whether it's with their all access, where maybe it becomes cheaper per month to get a Series X or a Series S, or they eventually just drop pricing altogether across the board. But let me know what you guys think about this down below. The Xbox Series X and the Series S certainly don't have the advantage in terms of speed versus the PS5's SSD, but it seems overall repairability would be better if it's slotted, which it is on the Series X. So that's good news there. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. I'm excited to get this system and finally take it apart, I guess, on launch day when I'm able to get one. And we can take a look at this SSD up close and see what our options are going into next generation, with maybe upgrades to the Xbox Series X day one. We'll see. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.